Hello again. We just keep running into each other. Are you fond of knocking on doors? Does the idea of crawling through plumbing pipes and ventilation shafts tantalize your very being? Can you feel a chill running down your spine when you think about violently bashing someone's head in with a claw hammer? I'm an individual of similar acquired taste, but unfortunately, such acts are frowned upon by the mainstream media controlled by the woke-skulled liberal left. However, I recently found out that the medium of video games lets you do exactly that with zero repercussions. Here I am familiarizing myself with American culture, but for those of niche tastes beyond widespread murder and butchery, there's a very special game for you. Deadbolt, a side-scrolling, fast-paced shooter that rewards cunning, speed, and an affinity for bloodshed. It's a title published by the small yet somehow still infamous Hopoo Games, a creative studio responsible for the inception of a Risk of Rain duology that brings joy to weather forecasters everywhere. Deadbolt was released in 2016 and developed quite the following, becoming a cult classic amongst those with a desire for speed and gratuitous violence. It was a game that captivated a lust for efficiency, in perfecting a level, in mastering the intricacies of a map layout and enemy responses, in utilizing every available aspect to your advantage to achieve a delicious 5-star rating. It was a game that satisfied your hunger and still had you asking for more. But that's the problem. There is no more. Deadbolt is a conclusive experience, because once you get to the end level, that's it, the game's over. You can replay missions to perfect your murderous rampage, but what's done is done. For the last 7 years, there have been only whispers of a sequel's release that have increasingly thinned out over the years as Risk of Rain's popularity grew and, unfortunately, drowned out Deadbolt in its shadow. With Hopoo Games focused on a remaster of the original Risk of Rain, the dwindling community of dedicated murder enthusiasts has had little to go off. Which is why this video exists. In this mastercrafted piece of YouTube content, I shall thoroughly analyse and explain the fantastic boons of this frankly unloved game. By doing so, I shall build up to my overall argument that not only should Deadbolt get a sequel, it's been divined by God himself that us starving fans finally get what we deserve. That being said, God also informed me that you have to play this game before watching this video. It's available for a ridiculously good price and it won't take too long to beat it. But for those who are familiar with the eternal darkness of Deadbolt, please sit back, grab your favourite bloodied hammer and beverage of your choosing, because I'm about to explain why Deadbolt deserves a sequel. Who the hell is this poser? Deadbolt is a game that operates in a similar way to titles such as Hotline Miami and Katana Zero. You are a lone, violent operative, issued missions that involve paying a visit to troublesome squatters occupying different abodes, facilities, and structures before, politely asking them to vacate the premises. Every mission will task you with acquiring information, destroying contraband, or forcing eviction. All of this essentially boils down to the third one, which becomes a problem because just like Hotline Miami and Katana Zero, bullets really hurt. One shot is enough to fold you into an omelette, or alternatively, splatter you across the wall. Your adversaries are not intent upon giving up their cracked ends so easily, and will deny their eviction with bursts of gunfire, landmines, and an array of blunt and sharp objects. Just like Hotline Miami and Katana Zero, you're outgunned and outnumbered, but you're not outmatched. Prior to every mission, you receive a brief on the task ahead. You're given introduction to new enemies, intelligence on potential avenues of attack, and information as to what you need to do to complete the level. You're able to purchase firearms and equipment from the local arms dealer, a suave gentleman willing to enhance your eviction proficiency in return for money. You are privy to a small but varied arsenal that provide different strengths and weaknesses. For instance, the tactical SMG is perfect for clearing out traps and remaining undetected, while the claw hammer fills me with a childlike joy. Once you're geared up, it's time to pay a visit to your dissenting tenants. Every level offers you differing challenges that are made apparent through the architecture, the enemy compositions, and the availability of weapons. With limited ammunition, a full frontal assault won't always end well, and you have to instead rely upon your cunning to survive. Turning off lights makes it harder for the enemy to see you, allowing you to eliminate targets in the shadows without them being able to react. Gunshots and environmental objects can create noise that attracts enemies to your position, letting you divide and weaken crowded groups. Vents and toilets provide you new angles of attack on adversaries in cover, as well as easy kills on unsuspecting enemies oblivious to their imminent demise. a whole new meaning to the phrase explosive diarrhea. And of course, you have access to one of the most important elements of your arsenal: doors. Doors can be used for multiple purposes. To break line of sight on a pursuing enemy, shutting it behind you means they won't be able to track where you next move to. Leaving doors open also allows you to bait enemies from across a long corridor to beeline for you, meaning you can get free shots before quickly relocating via a vent or a staircase. Knocking on a door will attract the nearest enemy to your position, allowing you to score a free kill. Your environment is far more versatile than what you'd normally expect from a game of this caliber, and it makes mastering your approach that much more rewarding to land. Enemies are responsive to your attacks, and while they are predictable after some time, they behave in manners that force you to assess your current position. Some enemies will duck behind cover when alerted before moving in to investigate the commotion, while others will beeline for the sight of a disturbance, typically those that are resistant to damage. Deadbolt's combat is fast-paced, high-octane, and the speed of which enemies will decimate you applies a lot of pressure to how you play. When you have a whole group of enemies running to your position, the weight of your demise and the penalty it's going to incur on your progress acts as a firm but fair punishment to those playing far too callously. This, however, is where things have gotten a little bit bland. You see, this section was partially a lie, because I don't find the combat to actually be all that engaging. I know, in a video about why Deadbolt is good enough for a sequel, I have rather slyly decided to instead disparage it. Another classic genius Rubric ruse. Ladies, please, one at a time, I'm sexually confused and a little bit scared. But this isn't without reason, because you see, if you melt down any game to its core components, it can very quickly become boring. Deadbolt is a game I have played and replayed since I was 14. It's the first game I streamed on my laptop during the pandemic, and it's one of the first games I ever played on a computer. The original dazzling intrigue I once felt naturally has faded into the obscurity of habituation. I know how everything plays, what levels come next, and what to expect from the enemy. And that's kind of the point, because you see, Deadbolt was never amazing for the combat. At least not to me. Deadbolt is such a bookmarked title because it utilizes something crucial, something essential to making not just something good, but something brilliant. Let's say, for instance, you are in a restaurant, a fine dining establishment where anything you want can be served up by world-class chefs. You ask for a bowl of their finest pasta al sugo. I had to pick an Italian dish or my ancestors would strangle me with a spaghetti noodle. Ah, wow. Take a look at that dish. Sehr gut, as they say in Italian. But if we took away all the sauce and took away all the ingredients used to craft such a terrific meal, what are we left with? Boiled pasta, the essentials, the building blocks, and let me tell you, Lego isn't actually that tasty. So when we compare this process to Deadbolt, inevitably its core components don't spark much joy, because what draws us to this meal isn't the core components, but instead the flavour. And Deadbolt's flavour is all in its mechanical and narrative creativity. You play as a John Deadbolt, the deadliest they them in the underworld. You're not employed as a bastard landlord, but instead a reaper, someone tasked with murdering the undead to usher them along into the afterlife. Your employer is a literal talking fireplace, one that only speaks in poems to you, and your local arms dealer is quite literally Charon the ferryman. Charon? Charon? How the fuck do you say that? And that money you pay him in? It's not Dogecoin, my friend, but rather the literal souls of your victims. Your missions take you on a journey of dismantling a wide plot across 4 different gang factions. The first of your adversaries is the Zombie Kings, a ragtag bunch of slackjaw thugs who turn to the undead after dying from a drug overdose. They distribute a remarkable elixir known as Ash, a drug that makes the undead feel alive again, and such a nature aligns with their zombie origins. The constant stimulation of the Ash could potentially leave them in a trance-like state, similarly to what us living people would see as zombie-like, dazed, sluggish, and not particularly bright. Bruh. Then you are met with the 1,000-Year Royals, a mafia-like coven of French vampires that are characterized by their tall stature, elegant taste in fashion, and their incessant need to fuck. Vampires are the product of a dead human betrayed by a lover, explaining their need to endlessly party and do the naughty, and such a betrayal makes them a considerably more concerning threat. Unless they're dancing. They could not give a fuck for as long as they get to juju on that funky beat. While the beautiful and dashing flock to nightclubs and bars, the horrid bat-like henchmen take to securing the remains of the forcibly silenced venues. The stark contrast in the outward appearance of the nightcrawlers against that of the party-going incubus and succubus aligns not only with the kind of work they do, but more so highlights the double-edged nature of their existence. They may be the most illustrious of the undead, but they will slice you into tiny pieces. Then come the Dredged, a legion comprised of a heavily armed skeleton crew. Quite literally, these bony brethren are the game embodiment of the berserk skeletons and are enveloped in a never-ending cold, driving them to follow their leader and pursue their master plan, escaping the underworld and fleeing into the warmth of the mortal realm. Their colour palette of cool blues and greys matches the icy chill they bring to every level, and their weaponry seems both cruder yet far more powerful than that of their more fleshy counterparts. Finally, you have the demons, living beings straight from the mouth of hell that serve under a brutal patriarchy. These fiery proud boys are paid handsomely to cross the river Styx and work as mercenaries for their employers, guarding numerous locations of furtive note. These sycophants of the late donor of the first gender-neutral bathroom, Ronald Reagan, rock classic biker gang attire, open denim jackets, greased pompadours, and a characteristic ceaseless aggression towards anything remotely black. Their appearance in the realm of Deadbolt is brief, as such ventures across the river are extremely dangerous, but they help to supplement an already diverse cast of adversaries with greater flair and style. Spending the last few minutes of this video to painstakingly summarize and explain the visual motifs and designs of every faction may seem redundant when one example could be enough, but it would be remiss for me to ignore any of the very deliberate detail that went into every enemy. Each discernible feature of a foe is a very purposeful aspect of their design, from their gait to how they sit to how they die. In an industry where often different enemies feel exactly the same, being able to fend off gangs of foes that have different lore origins as well as distinct appearances not only is a testament to the creative talents of Hoppu games, but also helps further contextualize your performance. The Reaper is a force to be reckoned with, able to take tens of goons of differing expertise and lethality to task with ease. And this diversity of your slaughter pool is also equally as well designed in their mechanical complexity. Zombie shamblers are SMG-toting thugs that are ahead of the game. So ahead, in fact, that they fucking lost it. The zombie's head is located usually in a completely different position to the gun-wielding body, and because the body can retaliate through getting hit, it means rushing into rooms without taking the time to find the fragile head is usually a very bad mistake. Vampire bartenders are menacing foes that float towards you with a combat shotgun. While at first you may think they're as vulnerable to pointy bits of hot lead as any other fool, you soon realise that they don't die. The bartenders keep their souls in phylacteries, vessels hidden across the level that allow them to be revived upon death. They can only be made mortal by destroying the soul container, and will become a drain on your ammo unless you swiftly deal with them. Skeleton technicians are total cowards. Hearing so much as a peep of a Sneeko video is enough to send them into a panic attack, one that is weaponized by their infinite supply of mines. What was once an empty hallway soon becomes a Falklands minefield. If you're going to make a lot of noise, you have to move fast to eliminate the technicians before they make navigating the map absolutely impossible. And this creativity goes even further in the boss battles. The zombie kings exist to orient you to how the game works. Puff and Roland are essentially basic enemies with larger health pools and bigger guns, but are quite easy to take down. Then you have the OnlyFans sisters, two head honchos of local vampire brothels that have to be killed for information. The problem is, however, that they are each other's phylactery, and are present inside two different buildings. This means you have to scale one building, kill a sister, and then hit a switch to open a vent that allows you to quickly return to the room once the other sister has been killed, so the phylacteries are destroyed. Then you have Val, a demon sniper that needs to be eliminated. She's able to hit you with concerning accuracy as long as you step into the light, and you have to navigate a well-lit building of armed thugs to reach the top and vanquish the troublesome sharpshooter. And then you have two of the best bosses in the game. The first is Team of a Tinkerer, a skeleton engineer working on the portal that will let the undead enter the realm of the living. His house is littered with traps and ambushes, making the player move far more carefully to avoid getting blown into 20 million pieces. Instead of riddling your target with bullets, you instead have to use their own traps against them and blow them up with their own ambush. And then you have Ibzan, the leader of the Dredged and the very mind that divined the escape to the mortal realm. But we'll talk about him later. This is where the excitement of Deadbolt is, for me. The creativity. Every enemy has a gimmick or an appearance that makes them unique, an identity in both how they look and act that makes the player assess and regard them differently. There's such a creative flair to everything in Deadbolt that gives me the flavour I so desperately wish more games had. Something that enriches the very way the game plays. It doesn't need $30 million graphics that can render someone's pubic hairs to be good. And that's another thing I love about it so much. AAA games are obsessed with graphical and audio fidelity. Typically this is because, in the big boy world of prestige video games, game publishers want to showcase new technologies of corporate partners and developers to further push sales. This isn't to say that they don't want to make their games ultimately look good, but simultaneously this trend in visual presentation of generating a super realistic world has done a lot more harm than good. Main reason is because we get the graphics nerds, the kind of people who measure a game's worth by whether or not the horse testicles realistically shrivel in cold temperature. These are the same people who insist on interpolating animation to 60 frames per second because, in their foolish caveman brains, higher number equals better. The other reason aside from this annoying scourge of people is that because so many games get obsessed with looking realistic, they not only become so inconceivably generic but also put a timer on their own relevance. Escape from Tarkov looks great today, but there will soon come a time when modern graphical tech makes it look like a PS1 game. And really, there's very little ways to understand and digest these appearances beyond the dichotomy of either giving my eyes an orgasm or looking like a Unity store asset flip. Realistic graphics usually just end up being testaments to times of more archaic technology, a lost component of a digital arms race between companies. But with games like Deadbolt, that's not a worry. Because it's deliberately stylized in a specific way, the visual presentation of a game becomes almost immortal in that regard. It's not a game trying to detail the loosening sphincter of your defecating horse in the most convincing manner, but instead, trying to look fucking interesting. Personally, I'm extremely fond of pixelized aesthetics. I always love the earlier Pokemon games with their 2D pixel sprites because there's such a tangible charm to them, and Deadbolt's adherence to this resonates with me greatly. You're able to discern all the props and furniture and enemies, none of the detail is obscured, but it doesn't need to showcase for every imperfection of your adversary's ugly ass face. In a world so violent and gory, it provides an odd sense of comfort. Ultimately, everything just looks good beyond any reason. There. That's my expert level explanation. Shit looks good and it makes me feel good. Wowee! Wow! Yippee! But what would a game like Deadbolt be without sound? Very bad. Fortunately, it does come with sound included, which is very generous of Hoppu Games in this trying era of the industry, and my god does it deliver. Christopher Christodoulou composed the very extensive soundtrack for Deadbolt, and, I say this very sparingly, there is not a single track on his playlist that does not bang so hard that not only does it bang your mother, it bangs your father too. Every level has its own track, music that effectively serenades the mission's setting and purpose. Some missions are sneaky, and the music accompanies your stealthy sleuthing with a fitting slow track. Some missions involve you butchering a nightclub, and of course, your bloody fray is supported with a strong thumping beat. And then you have the ending. With Ibsan and his dastardly crew fleeing into the mortal realm, you follow them through the portal to your own home. A mellow and melancholic track plays, apologetic, somewhat ashamed, yet given the purpose to continue by the mission it's imbued with, to smite the man who violated the natural order of things and forever put down the insurrection of ghouls and monsters. It's one of my favourite final boss tracks to complement this tragic showdown within the Reaper's snowy abode, and Christopher rightfully deserves praise for the amazing work he did for Deadbolt. With all its creative flair that adds narrative intrigue from the constructed world and the diverse adversaries that provide differing challenges in tandem with the level's architecture, it leaves but one piece of this skull-shaped puzzle missing. In this eternal night of zombies, vampires, skeletons, and demons, where is the story, the meaning, the narrative that explains it all? Why are we claw hammering our way through hordes of goons beyond the visceral satisfaction it brings us? What's the purpose of all these nightclubs? Who is Ibsam? When did I get a cat? He's cute. Can we keep him? For those who are unfamiliar with my crazed self, I am always popping a story boner. If your project offers a compelling and sincere story that resonates with me, that can suspend my belief from lofty heights, you can take the biggest and broadest brush you have available to colour me extremely intrigued. And Deadbolt is one of those games. John Deadbolt's bizarre adventure starts off as any good Saturday night does. Murder. Working as a reaper, they exist to cull the numbers of undead that reside within the eternal night of the place, and usher them on into the afterlife with a 9mm round to the face. Your employer, the Flames, gathers information from their network of candle spies and then tells you where to go and what to do. John Deadbolt need not ask any questions and sees to matters accordingly, until, however, they discover the mounting ash production of the zombie kings. As it turns out, the zombies are working to produce vast amounts of the revitalizing drug and are in league with the vampires, a very unusual union to occur. Once the head honchos of the zombies have been disposed of, the investigation brings John Deadbolt to the vampires. Many a nightclub pops up out of the blue and suddenly disappears off the map. After performing some aggressive population control, John Deadbolt hears mention of a harvest from the brothel sisters and soon finds out exactly what they mean. An entire nightclub turned to ash, a component of a scheme to invite as many vampires as possible to venues, beings who become unaware of their surroundings while partying and then turn them into some delicious underworld blow. John Deadbolt pays a visit to the leader of the 1,000 Year Royals to acquire more information, but soon realizes they missed out on an evidently mind-blowing conversation. Information in the room heavily details the process of the next nightclub to be harvested, and John Deadbolt springs into action to thwart the conversion before rushing off to Madame Stella's abode and gunning her down in brutal fashion. This then brings John Deadbolt to the skeletal shenanigans of the Dredged. Culling the Legion's numbers, John Deadbolt frequents many different facilities to track down and eliminate the elusive Ibzan. Their journey takes them from car garages packed with demon mercenaries to shipping depots under close skeletal guard. After breaking enough bones, John Deadbolt finds a container filled with corpses. The purpose of these cadavers is revealed after plundering Ibzan's home. The corpses are to be used to form the physical threshold that contains the portal, and the ashy remains of the harvested vampires, as well as the quantities produced by the zombies, are used to power it. John Deadbolt arrives just in time to witness Ibzan and his followers flee into the realm of the living, pursuing them to their own abode and vanquishing the skeletons once and for all. John Deadbolt meets with their employer, a being of flames made up of candles, and finally is able to rest after all their hard work. At surface level, it's not an award-winning tale. It's a satisfying conflict with a tangible resolution that has a meaningful trajectory because you know where it starts, where it goes, and where it ends, but there's not much below face value. You turn up, you kill people, and then you win the game. But Deadbolt is more than a chronological series of events. Sometimes when an enemy dies, they drop a cassette tape. Placing this in your cassette player within your house lets you listen to the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of the adversary you murdered hours before.
I'm over here stroking my dick, I got lotion on my dick.
Each tape sheds more light on the wider motivations of each of the gangs, as well as more information on the dynamics of how they interacted with one another. The zombies spend all their time smoking ash in an attempt to feel alive again, but forego their rejuvenating highs because they trust in their leader Roland. Of all the faction bosses, Roland seems to be the most genuine in his conviction to leave the place, but he wants his gang to be able to escape somewhere where they don't have to do drugs anymore to feel alive. The vampires lament about their curse to dance and revel, reliving the very same life that resulted in their inevitable demise at the hands of betrayal, as well as outline the process of which nightclubs are harvested by blinded workers so none of them know exactly what they're scooping up into the containers. We also have Madame Stella's tape, which speaks of how she would bump off her husbands for refusing to get jiggy with it and the virulence of her casual racism. The skeletons speak of the eternal cold they experience, of the plans to gather more flesh to form the portal, and how the generals will revive their fallen comrades to escape the cold for a fleeting moment, even if said comrades don't want to be brought back. This is followed by a cassette tape from Ibzan himself that details his panicked fervour, where he's encumbered with an impenetrable cold that causes him to frantically search for a fireplace, for a flame that is no longer there. And then, a final cassette tape. Hidden at the back of John Deadbolt's abode, stuffed behind a tree stump, lies the last morsel of furtive information. Bringing it back to your comfortable apartment, you place it inside the player, only for the music to cut out, and the room to fall deathly silent. It details someone coming home from another long day of work. Their apartment is in tatters, a door they have to fight open, a pitch dark bedroom, hardly any furniture, mould on the ceiling, and a dead fireplace. Their cycle involves them going out to kill undead and coming back with no need to sleep, eat, or drink. A numbing cycle with little input, interaction, joy, or meaning. Now, on its own, this doesn't necessarily mean anything, but when you cross-reference this with other details of the environment and the levels, You see what this is. Ibzan's room is bare, a tattered apartment with a door you have to fight open, devoid of furniture and care, a large chunk of a wall recently plastered over, and through some of it you can see the remnants of what looks to be a fireplace. In Ibzan's possession sits a lighter that doesn't work anymore, something a Reaper would use to navigate the vents, as well as a note detailing Ibzan's regret over a decision he once made. Ibzan himself bleeds black blood, is the most fearsome adversary in the game that decimates you in a head-on shootout, and most crucially, is a skeleton. Now, due to YouTube's incessant need to censor really dumb shit, I'm gonna have to say this in really stupid terminology, but skeletons were once humans that, well, unalived themselves. Deadbolt's story is more than just an undead retelling of a John Wick movie. It's a tragic, sad tale, a bitterly ironic, sad tale. The zombies died from drug abuse and now can only feel alive from endless consumption of the very thing that killed them. The vampires were betrayed by those close to them and end up being harvested by those they trusted to lead them in the place. The skeletons wanted to die and now are forced to live forever. Even when you kill them, they get brought back. This ironic tragedy isn't a coincidence or a subjective interpretation, it's very deliberate and it speaks to just how much thought went into the conceptualization of these factions. But above all, the most ironically tragic is Ibzan, a Reaper who had no friends, who was shut out by the flames, who wanted a companion, ends his own life to escape the torturous monotony of his lonely existence. But once it's all gone, he wants nothing more than to have it back again. He wants to say sorry for the mistake he made. But despite all he does to try again, to feel the warmth once more, it isn't enough to save him or anyone else. Ibzan is left cold and alone, a being of emotion that wanted the warmth of the Flame's friendship, and is slain at the hands of a hopelessly apathetic successor that gets to enjoy the warmth Ibzan wanted so much for all of eternity. And the worst part is that they don't even care about it. The story is so poetic and melancholic. It's a tale of death where those who have died suffer the torture of an inescapable regret where they can't go back and fix what went wrong. Instead, they have to be kept within the confines of their purgatory, and John Deadbolt has to enforce this divide between the living and the dead with brutal force. But above the poetry and the detail and how deflated but satisfied finishing the game makes me feel, it's a conclusive experience. Deadbolt ties up all loose ends in such a definitive and rewarding way that a sequel wouldn't be necessary to the full enjoyment and understanding of this story. It's such a criminally brief experience that actually leaves me kinda conflicted as to my desire for a sequel. In a creative industry that has to keep milking every remotely good IP until it's something to be loathed instead of fondly cherished, part of me would rather reflect on Deadbolt as a brilliant experience that said and did all it needed to during its time of relevance, instead of something that just stayed around for too long. That being said, it's a world so full of potential to explore more, new factions, new aspects of a realm, new locales, weapons, features. Deadbolt was but a toe dip into the shimmering waters of the world, and with talent on display from Hoppu Games, they're clearly competent and talented enough to be able to make a sequel even more outstanding than its predecessor. Deadbolt deserves a sequel. There's room for more here. And just because the tale of Ibzan is over, doesn't mean that the story of the Reaper is. I can wholeheartedly say that there is still a yearning for a second Deadbolt. To this day, a whole 7 years after its release, there is a small but noticeable group of people who still make levels and mods for this game. A user called Classic Cheese 18 drew and animated a new faction of werewolves, and people such as RPD Survivor have relentlessly been revisiting and making both challenging and aesthetically fitting missions for people to perfect. They're both now valuable members of my community that I'm very grateful to have around. Not to mention the ongoing endeavours of a Mr. Jag, the world record holder for the speedrun time of Deadbolt, but also quite literally my first stream viewer ever. I don't know why the fuck you stuck around, my first stream looked like a slideshow presentation, and there are a ton more people who would be ecstatic to learn of another installment to this intriguing world. To close out this desperate plea for more delicious Deadbolt goodness, I would like to thank Hoppu Games personally for creating a game that has been formative in my own creative endeavours, as well as my own enjoyment of this medium that is constantly under siege from the soulless, profit-driven incentives of the mainstream industry. Sequel or not, Deadbolt is a gem that should be acknowledged by all for the sheer passion that manifested in such a creative Enterprise. Seriously though, make Deadbolt 2 or I'm going to fucking climb out of your toilet.
Shut.